Good evening. My name is Connie Taylor, and I'm the co-vice president with the League of Women Voters in Johnson County. I'd like to welcome you all to this evening's event, especially to our justices, our online audience, as well as the in-person audience here at Johnson County Community College. Our co-sponsors for tonight's program are JCCC's Political Engagement Leadership Alliance, Student Organization, Loud Light, Kansas Interfaith Action, Main Street Coalition, the League of Women Voters of Johnson County, the League of Women Voters of Lawrence Douglas County, and the League of Women Voters of Wichita Metro. Tonight's event is the first in a series of educational events these partners are hosting before the November 8th election. Please join us in person or online for our next two events focused on the two constitutional amendments that will be on the ballot. Those events are October 27th at KU and November 3rd at Wichita State University. A few housekeeping items. The bathrooms are located out the doors, main doors here and to your right, and there's also restrooms downstairs. If you take the stairs, they're immediately to your right. I'd like to also let you know that tonight we are recording this event, and it will be made available after tonight. If there is time at the end of the program for a few audience questions, volunteers have note cards for you to write your questions. Raise your hand. Someone will bring you a note card and then collect them. Online audiences can use the Q&A feature that's in Zoom. Please remember that our justices cannot answer questions regarding cases. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our two moderators tonight. To my immediate left is Ben Taylor. He's a Loud Light Fellow, community activist, and online influencer. He grew up here in Johnson County, and it was there he discovered his passion for politics. He's engaged on panels, interned with representatives, and organized protests. He's been featured on KCUR, the Kansas City Star, and KSHB. Today, he's pursuing a degree in political science and plans on pursuing a career in that field. And on the other side of the table, we have Margaret Lewis. She's at JCCC as well as at KU. She's pursuing a bachelor's of architecture degree and is scheduled to graduate in December. Margaret is a member of the American Institute of Architecture Students, where she serves on the National Programming Task Force. This semester, Margaret is working as a Loud Light Fellow to organize students here at JCCC and elevate their voices in the political process. And now I'll turn it over to our moderators.
Thank you, Connie, and thank you to our audience for coming here tonight. We're here because in November, the Kansas voters are going to be called to make an important decision. We're going to be electing our Supreme Court justices and local judges. This could have a monumental impact on shaping Kansas policy. Tonight, we're going to be talking to three of those justices.
To introduce our panelists tonight, Chief Justice Marla Weaver, Justice Evelyn Wilson, and Justice Melissa Stanley.
Let's begin. And to get us started, could each of you tell us a little bit about yourselves and how you got to become a Supreme Court justice?
Good evening. If I may take a minute just to express gratitude for the organizers of the event and to all of you for either being here in person or being here online. We think that education about Kansas courts and the role of courts in our government are critical to everyone understanding really how our democracy works. how our government functions. And I hope that you leave this evening with a better idea of the role of fair and impartial courts in our governmental system. And so backing up down to the question that was asked of me to address. I am a native Kansan, actually a fourth generation Kansan. I grew up on the far western border of Kansas, about 20 miles from the Colorado border and about 36, 40 miles from the Nebraska border. So about as far away from here as you can get, at least if you're staying in the northern part of the state. I came obviously from a very agricultural background. And my road to the law is really one that I just kind of decided on without any real good model or purpose for doing so, at least initially. I was, you can see by my age perhaps, that you put me in a generation where I was greatly impacted by the civil rights movement. And saw how the things that were happening in the 60s and early 70s were really changing our society. And I saw that attorneys had a role in that, and that they were helping to move forward some of the things that were happening to bring more equal rights in large part to all of us. That began to pique my interest in what the law could do and what it could bring. I often say, though, that perhaps one of the great things that motivated me was in my late grade school years, I read To Kill a Mockingbird. And that story and the life of Atticus Finch, actually I always wanted to be Scappa's daughter. But the life of Atticus Finch really appealed to me. He was a lawyer, but he was also a citizen legislator. And he was someone who worked in his community to make his community better and stronger. And I aspired to be someone who could do something like that. And then, the story, of course, I think most of you are familiar with this, I won't go into too much detail, but Atticus is called by a judge to represent an wrongly accused innocent person of color who is accused of raping a white young woman. And the passion of the town is extreme. So he understands the challenge that is before him. And the part of the book, and it is only in the book, it does not make the movie, so you cannot watch Gregory Peck say these lines if you want to do the shortcut version. But in the book, if you read it, and you read Atticus Finch's closing argument to the jury, well, men, because at that time in the South, and really in most of the United States, it was men who served on the jury, all white men. He looks at them and he says, gentlemen, you know there's only one place where all of us are truly equal. We all know that we're all born with different attributes and with different benefits. Some of us are smarter than others, some of us are richer than others. He makes it, and uses an example of some women make better cakes than others. But in a courtroom, the courtroom is the great level. And in that courtroom, all of us are equal. He goes on, I think, recognizing the challenge that's in front of him and says, we all understand that courts, like any human institution, have their faults. And he challenges them to not fall into one of those biases or faults. And unfortunately, that jury does. But what we know from the rest of the story, and at least from Atticus's approach, is that although justice may not have been done in that case, there was an ongoing need and an ongoing quest that all of us, I hope, have, which is to help smooth out those imperfections. And whatever they are, to do all we can to be sure everyone who steps into that courtroom has the ability to have a trial, a hearing, whatever the situation is, an appeal before us where they are, all of us are equal, where we all serve as the great levelers. And as a young child, not knowing any attorneys, not knowing really how you got to be an attorney, not really knowing what the court system really was about or anything else, I decided that was what my life goal was to be a part of that. And I'm one of those rare people who never varied from that goal once it was set. I had decided then I wanted to go to law school. I was a first generation college student. I really didn't know how I was going to go to school and afford to pay for it. I really didn't know how I got into school. I certainly didn't know how you went to law school. All of that was just foreign to me, and frankly, really didn't know anybody who could help me navigate much of it. But fortunately, I found a way with perseverance and whatever, and in my little small mind, if you wanted to go to law school, it made sense to go to an undergraduate campus where there was a law school. And I just chose Washburn, and I stayed at Washburn for that. I then practiced law in Topeka, so I've spent my professional life in Topeka. My law practice initially was very varied. I was in one of the large, at that time, the largest law firm in Topeka, and they really had a system of having their associates work and do a little bit of everything. But eventually, I specialized in doing healthcare law and professional liability litigation. So not only for physicians and other medical care providers, architects, engineers, accountants, lawyers, and others. And so I had the wonderful opportunity to be in the courtroom quite a bit, in trying cases both in federal and state court and all over the state because of the nature of the practice. After about 12 years, well, actually before that, but after I'd been doing that for a while, people came to me and said, "Have you thought about being a judge?" And I said, "I haven't." In fact, my brother tells the story that I don't remember, but he does, that on the day I graduated from law school, he asked me if I ever wanted to be a judge. And I very quickly and adamantly said, no. So when these people first approached me, that kind of was my attitude. No, I don't know that that's for me. I don't know that that's the path. But they kept coming back. And I like to think part of it was that they thought I had the ability to be a decent judge. But really the thing that was pushing them and that they kept pushing for me was that there were no women judges on the trial court in our capital city for most of the time that I practiced law. And there were very, very few women who were judges anywhere in our state. There were very few judges in Texas. And the more I thought about how important I thought it was, especially as I had young daughters, that they and other young women be able to look at the bench and see, yes, women are represented. Women do have that chance to be there where there's that equal playing field of the law. And so I did finally decide to put my name in. Shawnee County uses a system much like the Kansas Supreme Court has of a commission process for the selection of judges. You apply and to be a judge, you fill out a very long and involved application. You submit writings of all sorts to them, all kinds of other things. I think my stack, at least with the Supreme Court, was about this big at the time I was done. Those were the days you still printed them out. Bound them and put them in notebooks or whatever for the commission to look at. The commission is made up at the county level, and Johnson County uses this system as well, so that there are a number of lay, non-attorney members equal to the number of county commissioners, and then an equal number of attorneys on the commission. And they vet those candidates to doing background checks by asking all kinds of questions, and really do an investigation, an interview, and then they select at that time at the county level. You sent 3 names to the governor. This is a system that is very democratic to the extent that anybody, any attorney in the state who meets the basic minimums can apply. It's not a system where the person who is the decision maker says, oh, like what we're used to seeing in the United States Supreme Court, where the president says, this is the person, or this is the group of people I want to reach out to. Instead, it's kind of a reverse process that attorneys say, I'm interested, come look at me. And so from that standpoint, I was lucky enough to be one of the 3 names that went to the governor and was selected to serve, and was the only woman who served on the county bench for a while. Eventually, I was joined. I'm glad to say now that I'm gone, it's now over the majority of women on the county bench. So things have changed. But after a while there, I was appointed to be the chief judge of that district, which means you take on administrative responsibilities for running that county, that district forward. The human resources issues, the budget issues are going to your county commission for those expenses that the county pays, helping let the Supreme Court know about the needs for the state budget, those kinds of things. And I found I really did like that. And I also felt from that experience that I maybe had something to add to the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court, in addition to deciding cases, is the administrator for all courts of the state of Kansas. So for the courts, they're located in all 105 counties. And that experience made me interested in doing that part of the job as well. After about 12 years, I applied for the Supreme Court, went through that same application process. At the state level, the nominating commission is based upon congressional districts. There's a non-attorney and an attorney from each congressional district. There is also an attorney who is elected as chair of that commission. As justices, we chair our non-voting chairs, but organizers really is what we are of the county commissions. Again, I was one of 3 names that went to the governor and was selected, and have now served on the court since 2003. I'm now Chief Justice, and the only thing that qualifies you to be Chief Justice is that you've been around for a long time. The Chief Justice is the most senior person of the court. But it has gone full circle for me to be able to do both the administrative side and the decision-making side. So that's my path to the Supreme Court, and hopefully we didn't go too long about the process, but having heard that process, I think will make it easier for the others to explain their paths. Sure.
I'm Evelyn Wilson, and I also grew up in a very rural part of Kansas. My family has very deep roots in Kansas. We came over in the late 1800s and have been farmers ever since. My brother and my sister are still farm in Smith County. I left to go to college, and my path is similar in a way to Chief Lukert's, in that when I grew up, I didn't know any lawyers. I certainly didn't know any women lawyers, but we had very good schools in Smith Center. I had excellent teachers, and one of the books that I read was about a woman who lived during the Salem witch trials and was treated very unjustly. She was accused unjustly. She was treated unjustly by the people in power, and I thought that was terrible. And so I thought, I wish I had been there to stick up for that woman and to help her, much like what a lawyer does. And so I talked about becoming a lawyer. My mother really wanted me to be a musician, but she didn't realize how little talent I had, and I probably still have been living at home now, but, we were talking about going to college, and I was interested in Bethany College, a small college in Kansas, and, we always had dinner together, and one night at dinner, my father asked me, whatever happened to being a lawyer? When he asked me that question, it was probably the first time that I thought maybe I could really do that. That was just something like being president or something like that. But you think, oh yeah, I'm going to do that. But if my dad thought I could do it, maybe I could do it. I was still going to hedge my bets, though. I went to Bethany and I got a degree in business in case I didn't get into law school or in case they drug me out of the court, which I saw the paper chase. And that was in the early 70s. And it was about law students and how hard law school was. So I did get into law school, and when I graduated from law school, I started my professional career as a lawyer. And I like to say that I'm kind of in the third phase of my professional career. My first two phases were about equally long. My first phase was as a trial lawyer. And I spent 19 years as a trial lawyer. Two very different experiences. The first half, approximately, was in a small town in northwest Kansas. I was in a two-person firm, and so I was with an older gentleman I practiced law with, and we had one telephone line. And our secretary was just starting out learning how to use a word processor. And so it took me a while to convince Elmo to get another line. But Elmo was a wonderful mentor. I've been very lucky that way to have people who were interested in me and wanted me to succeed. And that's so important. But Elmo first showed me how to be a lawyer and let me go along. And then he encouraged me to do all of those things that trial lawyers do. So I was off to the races, making arguments before the district court judge on motions, taking depositions. And the thing that was unique and interesting about a rural practice is that you can't specialize in anything. So I was writing contracts, I was writing wills, I was defending farmers during the farm crisis against banks, and I was doing jury trials. My first jury trial was a criminal case where I did it all by myself from soup to nuts. I mean, you have to be a detective, you have to question the witnesses, you have to introduce the witnesses and the evidence, and do the opening statements and closing arguments. That I represented divorced clients, and those experiences were invaluable because they were so wide in context. And then the second half, my husband got a job close to Topeka. He was a school administrator, and I got a job as an attorney in a larger law firm in Topeka. And in an urban practice, you do limit your practice. And so I did much of the same kinds of things that Chief Luker was doing. I represented attorneys and doctors who were sued. I represented people who were involved in car accidents and needed to be defended. I was disciplinary counsel for the Real Estate Commission. And so my job in an agency was to go after real estate agents who were not following the rules or committing fraud or whatever they might be doing. I was the one who held them accountable. And then an opportunity came up when a district court judge in Shawnee County retired. And when you're a trial lawyer, you make a lot of presentations to a lot of judges. And there were some really good ones, and there were some that were not so good. And it occurred to me from time to time, you know what, I think I can do that. I can do that just as good as that person. So after being a trial lawyer for almost 20 years, I applied for the position in Shawnee County to be a district court judge. And I was able to do that. My first, in a district like Shawnee County, as opposed to a more rural district, the judges have a more narrow focus in their assignments. Out west, the judges had to, do everything, all of those subjects that I mentioned. We had one district judge who had to do it all. But in Shawnee County, I was given some assignments by the administrative judge. Initially, I was assigned to a family law practice or domestic practice, which did primarily divorces and paternity cases, child custody. So I had some experience with that, so I was able to hit the ground running, and I had enough trial experience that I knew the rules, the civil procedure and the evidence rules. And then I was assigned a criminal assignment. And I had that assignment for about 11 years. And during that assignment, I presided primarily over felony cases. So very serious criminal cases. And I was the presiding judge over, for at least 80 felony jury trials that ranged from everything from a felony DUI or possession of drugs, all the way up through murder in the first degree, rape, sexual exploitation of a child, those cases that carry the potential of life sentence. So all of the evidence was presented right there in the courtroom in front of me, and I made sure that the lawyers followed the rules. I made sure it was my job to make sure that the jury was instructed on what the law is in every one of those cases. And I would say probably the most important job I ever felt as a trial judge was to make sure that the trials were fair and done under the rules. And I would often tell the attorneys, I'm not here just to make sure one side or the other is a fair trial. I'm here to make sure everybody gets a fair trial. And so sometimes I did feel like, I was watching the lawyers and the people participating. I was watching the gallery because all trials were. And there were times when I had an entire large courtroom full of people who were very emotional. And really the only thing that kept those people sometimes quiet and had their attention and that they were respectful of what was happening was their respect for the law and their respect for the courtroom. But I was really proud of the fact that I was there to make sure that happened, that things happened the way that they were supposed to happen under the rules. And I can tell you that after doing that for 15 years, that happened. I saw it happen again and again and again. Jurors don't have any interest in those cases. They're not related to the cases. They didn't see what happened. They don't know the people. If they did, they'd be a witness, or they would have to be recused from being a juror. They had no interest in those cases, and yet time after time after time, they listened carefully for, I think it was $10 a day. And they really took their job seriously. That was profound to me. That was so important that they exercised their civic duty so responsibly. After I had been a district judge for about 10 years, I was also named chief judge in Shawnee County, and so I had all of the administrative responsibilities assigned to me to human resources, those things that Chief Luker mentioned. And I too enjoyed that. I enjoyed trying to help the other judges have goals so that they could all fly in formation because, I couldn't by and large tell them what they had to do. They also were independent judges. And so there was a lot of convincing and cajoling and, a lot of administration dealing with court service officers, people in the clerk's office, and making sure that the budgets and reports were done properly. I also had a civil assignment. That was one after I was a chief judge. I assigned myself and after 15 years, another opportunity came up, and that was to be on the Supreme Court. There was at the time Justice Johnson at the time. So as Chief Lukert mentioned, all of those things, all of that information that you send in a very long application form, multiple forms with background checks, the KBI does, transcripts, high school transcript, college transcript, law school transcripts. They still wanted to know my grades. I mean, I was 59 years old, and they wanted to know my grades from college to high school. But it was a very, just a deep investigation, and then I interviewed along about 18 or 19. And right before the pandemic, I was chosen by the governor to be the next justice on the Supreme Court, and I've been doing that since January of 2020. And as an appellate judge, we do a lot of reading and writing, and I assist the chief in administering all of the courts in the state of Kansas. So my background as an administrator, but I thoroughly enjoy the challenge, and I love being a justice in the Kansas Supreme Court. Wonderful opportunity.
My background is very different from my colleagues. I went to the University of Kansas and majored in business. Never with the thought of being a lawyer, didn't know a lawyer. Interviewed on campus, narrowed it down to should I work for Hormel or Dillard's department stores. Took the Dillard department stores, moved down to Texas, and I spent $25 million a year on ladies' ready-to-wear in 40 different stores. I did that for 7 years. And then I decided I didn't like working nights and weekends and holidays for 60 hours a week, 70 hours a week. If I was going to do that, I'd rather do it on my own time. And then I asked a friend of a friend who knew a lawyer, and I thought maybe I'll go to law school, try that out. I did. I moved up here, went to UMKC Law School. I did like law school. I worked as a lawyer to a judge in the Western District of Missouri Federal Court. I like doing that. I did that for 2 years. It's kind of a temporary job normally. So I did that for 2 years. I went to work for a very large law firm. At the time, it was the 51st largest law firm in the country. And we're talking very narrow when you get that big, 800 lawyers. And I did employment law. That's all I did. I did a lot of pro bono work, specifically in the area of foster care, because I am crazy about kids. And one of my partners, after 6 years, was appointed to be a federal judge. And he said, "Hey, Melissa, you're the one that has all the experience of, being a lawyer to a judge. Why don't you come and help me for a couple years? You'll take a leave of absence, and you could try being a foster mom." I thought that sounded like a good idea. I never went back. I've had, through the formal foster care system and some informal kids, about 12 foster kids. I've adopted 4. Finally, I got married when I was 42 after I adopted all the kids. He adopted my kids because they didn't have a dad. We have a blended family of 6 children. I did happen to marry a judge, worked for a judge, and they said, "Melissa, maybe you should be a judge." I'm like, who would ever hire a lawyer to a judge to be a judge? But through this nonpartisan merit selection system where you just get to apply, I applied. And the governor, I made it through the merit selection system, and the governor chose me to be on the Kansas Court of Appeals. And I was on the Kansas Court of Appeals for 13 years. and then applied 2 years ago to be on the Kansas Supreme Court. And again, through the nonpartisan merit selection system, the governor made it through the final three, and in December of 2020 was appointed to the Kansas Supreme Court. And if you have any further questions about this, you can talk to my sister who's in the audience. She goes way, way back and can tell you really simple.
Thank you so much, all of you. It's beautiful. Our next question was actually how the justices are currently selected to sit on the Kansas Supreme Court. I'm gonna assume since 2020 that has not changed. So Ephraim will ask the next question.
Well, there are actually 3 different ways that judges, including there's a different way for justices, but there are 3 different ways that judges are selected in Kansas. Okay, there's the way that justices are chosen. This is what I talked about, which is the nonpartisan merit selection system. And that's where you have, the 4 non-lawyers, 1 from each congressional district in Kansas that's picked by the governor, and then 1 lawyer from each congressional district, and those are picked by the lawyers in those congressional districts, and then 1 lawyer that's the chair that the chief talked about that is selected by all 13,000 lawyers in Kansas. So you have 9 people. So we interviewed 9 on 1, okay? So that's pretty fun. So all the people apply, you send all this material, and based on merit, they're calling your opposing counsel, they're calling everybody. When I was a judge for 13 years, they're calling attorneys that have appeared in front of you. It's based on merit, okay? And so then they select 3, that goes to the governor, then the governor interviews you. Then what happens is, in the first election, after you're appointed, the first general election, and for Justice Wilson and me, that is November, you are subject to what's called a retention election. And this is, to put it simply, a yes-no vote. And it'll say right on there, do you vote to retain, blah, blah, as a judge, a justice, whatever. And then for the Supreme Court, every 6 years after that, on this nonpartisan merit selection system, you'll be asked the yes-no question. And we can talk a little bit later about, how you determine whether or not you want to vote yes or no. Okay. The second way you pick, all right, so, and then trial courts, they do it, but on the county level. So the county commissioner picks, there's 31 judicial districts, so then the county commissioner picks 1 non-lawyer, and then the lawyers in that judicial district pick a lawyer, and then they do the same thing, and it goes to the governor, right? And then it's every 4 years. But half the 31 judicial districts do a general election. So, for example, I was over at KCK Community College, Wyandotte County, they elect their judges. So 2 people decide to run, or 3 people, an independent, a Republican, a Democrat, a Green Party, 4 people. Anybody decides to run, you just run for judge.
Right, and if I can just interject, then it's up to the voter to do all of that vetting. There's no nominating commission. It's just, you sign up to be a judge, and then the voters decide who to vote for. So all of that decision-making is on the shoulders of the voters. Where I was in Smith Center and in Decatur County initially, that was an elected district, and that's what you did.
Garden City is nonpartisan merit selection. Dodge City is general election. Douglas County, Lawrence, nonpartisan merit selection. Sedgwick County, Wichita, general election. Okay?
The way that happens is that each community, each judicial district can choose which system they use. It's kind of the compromise when this was all adopted in the late 1950s. And I believe it is 8 years, there could be a petition to change the method of which you select at the local level. And so some of you may remember back about a decade ago now, I think, Johnson County had that question that was put before the voters here. And the voters here decided that they would stay with the nominating merit selection system. They rejected changing to the elected system. And one of the things that you see with that, and we've talked about how it allows, there's a broader, usually a broader pool, a larger number of people that are being vetted for that position. I believe the number for this election year was that there were 11 positions in elected districts where there was new people running, but nobody in opposition. So we have most of the, clear across the state, even where there are people who are not new, most of those positions have already been decided. Frankly, there's often not any competition for those positions. So there's really, it's just that's kind of how that system operates.
Right, so,
And then the third system.
well, the third system is in 2014, the Court of Appeals changed. It was after I was already on the Court of Appeals changed, and that's a statutory court, and they changed the statute, the legislature did, and they went to what is called the federal model, where the top executive, which would be the governor, just picks somebody, and then it's confirmed by the Senate. And you see that that's how the United States Supreme Court justices are chosen. So the president picks somebody, and it's confirmed by the Senate. So that is how Court of Appeals judges are selected. So those are kind of the three big ways in the country that judges are chosen, and we have all three of them here in Kansas. Okay.
So it's very confusing.
If I could say one more thing about the Court of Appeals, it's really a modified, more specifically a modified federal model, because you will see Court of Appeals judges also on the retention vote. Now, at the federal level, once you're appointed and you're confirmed by the Senate, they don't ever.
It's called lifetime tenure, so you can only be impeached. We don't have.
Thank you for all of those insightful answers. And we all know that there are three branches of government, but what role does your branch play in the separation of powers at any one of you?
Well, there are three branches of government. The first is the legislative. I could call on somebody, could call my neighbor, Mary Hall. But the legislative branch makes the laws, the executive branch enforces the laws, and then the judicial branch interprets the law, right? So in doing that, we are very different than the first two branches of government, because the first two branches of government cater to the people. They care about what you guys think. What do you want me to vote for? I want to understand what you, the constituents, want. All right? So, lobbyists, what do you want? People in my neighborhood, what do you want? What are my own personal beliefs? What about my political party? What do they believe? Right? So those two branches of government. Who do we cater to? The rule of law. Our own personal beliefs don't matter. You could say that's why we wear black robes, because we leave everything behind. So we have the rule of law, which ultimately is the United States Constitution, the Kansas Constitution, and the legislature makes the laws. Now, we make sure that the legislature's laws conform and don't violate the Kansas Constitution, right? But we're different than the other branches of government. There's checks and balances. So the legislature can't make laws that violate the Constitution. The legislature, does our budgets. And the governor makes sure, the governor can veto, the executive branch vetoes legislative action. You know, so you have all those checks and balances. But the biggest difference between the three branches of government is that we have to make unpopular decisions sometimes. You know, I can tell you that at the Court of Appeals, which, you know, is kind of the treadmill, you know, so at the Court of Appeals, I wrote over 1,200 opinions in 13 years. Okay. There are opinions, and you can go online, you can read opinions. You will never know whether I agree with the outcome. Because it didn't matter whether I agreed with the outcome. I took an oath to apply the rule of law to the facts of the case. And that's the difference.
Another difference between us and the other branches of government is that we don't create our business. We don't walk in as a legislature would and say, I'm going to introduce a bill that does X. And we don't ever decide, oh, wait a minute, I just happened to be reading this newspaper article and saw that the legislature passed this statute. It just doesn't seem very constitutional to me. So I think maybe we should talk about that and decide if it's constitutional. That's not the way it works. It depends on somebody bringing a lawsuit, and they challenge that lawsuit, that law is unconstitutional. And then they present the arguments to us, and then the other side presents the arguments to us with a counter to that. And we don't add to those arguments. If I might be sitting there, and frankly, I often do, and go, wow, I wonder why they didn't argue with this, because that looked like it'd be a pretty good argument to me. But we don't make up those arguments either. We follow our own internal rules. They're not really internal rules, they're the rule of law rules that say we rely on that adversary process. We apply the plain language of the law if the language is plain. And if it is not plain, we don't make up what we think that should be. Instead, we say, what was the drafter's intent? And if it's the Constitution, that means we're looking at what are the people's intent when they adopted our Constitution, our people's document. And if it's a law, we're saying, what did the legislature mean when they said that? And that's what we do. We follow those rules, which are the foundation of the rule of law in the state.
I think another good example from my own history is that trial I told you about, where there was a whole big courtroom full of people, very, very emotional people involving a murder. And many of the people in the back of the courtroom knew the victim of that homicide. And they had very strong feelings. It was emotion packed in that courtroom. But I was there as a judge to make sure that the only evidence that came in under the rules. Not a bunch of people who came in with rumors that they have heard or what they thought probably must have happened, even though they weren't there and they have no direct knowledge. That's not under the rules, and I wasn't going to let it happen in any way other than what the rules required or allowed. And at the end of the trial, I wasn't going to take a vote of those people who felt very strongly about how this should turn out. This isn't how it works. It was only the jury who was going to decide what actually had happened if the witnesses disagreed, if their viewpoints were different. They decided who was telling the truth. They decided who had a better viewpoint. Nobody else was going to be able to vote. And the law that would be applied was the law that I had given them based on my study. There was going to be no other vote if this wasn't. That just isn't how it happens.
And if she made a mistake in giving them that law or in applying those rules in the courtroom, then that's where the appellate court comes in. The parties then appeal to the appellate court and say, that judge made a mistake, and we need you to correct it. And there are rules again about how we go about that. And in large part, they kind of divide into, we don't We're not in that court. We didn't see those witnesses. We didn't hear that testimony live. We didn't look at those people in the eye. The trial judge did, and the jury did. And so, however they found the facts to be, that's what we take. We don't second guess that, even if sometimes we read a whole transcript and you think, how they come to that? But again, that's not our role. We say, okay, so these are the facts. And then we have to look at was there a mistake of law? And we apply that to the facts they found, not facts that we found. And look to see if there was an error that needs correction. And if so, then we reverse. That's how that could work.
Okay, so we're also going to be taking audience questions soon. So if you have a question for one of our panelists, write it down on those note cards that we shared out at the beginning of our sessions. And then you can raise your card up and we'll collect them. Also, if you're with us online, you can put your questions inside. Now, back to our questions. Historically, justices have usually been retained by campus voters. And what does retention mean for the stability of the court?
We have there in the history. This system that we have described today has been in place since the late 1950s, and was adopted by constitutional amendment at that time after what is famously known as the Triple Play, that was seen as kind of like political insider trading that brought people to the Supreme Court. And since that time, justices have stood for retention every 6 years, and trial judges for every 4. So I have stood for retention every 4 or 6 years since I first went on the bench in 1992. When I first was running for retention, trial judges often were retained at percentages that ranged in 80s and 70s. And the belief was we did need stable courts, and that there should be a change in the court only if the judge was not following the fundamental principles of the rule of law. That judge was not applying their oath of office to uphold the Constitution of the United States and the state of Kansas. And that there was some really wrong corruption, there was some really bad fundamental decision-making flaw, that person just was not following their oath or doing their job. It was not believed that we would just change people in the stream of the system because of a decision, or 2 decisions, or 3 decisions. Because we all have disagreements. We dissent with each other. There are differences of opinion on how a case should become outcome. But the question is the court, or is that person, that judge, following the law on a systematic basis and doing and upholding their oath? And the reason that's important in the law is because the foundation of the law is that rule of law that is built in part on precedent cases, on decisions of cases. And what that means is that when our court interprets a law that is the state law, then all 105 courts in the state of Kansas are to follow the law that we set. Contracts are written on that based upon decisions we do. People make life decisions based upon the things that we decide. That continuity of decision-making and precedent is important to all kinds of aspects of the way our economy functions and the way our society functions. And that has really led to the principle that it's very unstabilizing to have vast changes in the law and vast changes in those who are making the decision. Unfortunately, in recent years, there's been more of a tendency for some factions to want to look at whether decisions came out the way they wanted them to look. In 2004, there were attacks on our court, 2 justices that were up for retention then. Those retention numbers slipped from what I was talking about, commonly in the 70s or 80s, to 53%. And those 2 justices were retained. It takes a requirement of that, but really because of some publicity about 2 cases, there was that attack, and so that attitude or that view has changed with time, and but today there have been we've maintained that stability, and I will tell you that we do everything as a group. And if you are ever on a committee or in an environment where you do all decision-making as a group, and we even write our documents as a group, one personality can change the dynamics and the culture and the functionality of that group. We hear horror stories from other courts across the country where people can't work together and how dysfunctional that makes the court. Fortunately, we've never had that I know of in Kansas, and that again is a reason really to keep the stability of the people that are working together and that have worked.
All right, thank you guys so much. We have a couple questions for our audience. We have a lot of questions, but we're only going to be able to just 2. So the question that we want to pose is, where can we go to find more information on the judges that we're going to be voting on this November, other than the meeting?
Well, I would say we try to make, we'll talk about the Supreme Court first. We try to be as transparent as we can. So everything is open to the public. And you don't even have to come to Topeka. So you can watch our oral arguments. And like the chief said, what you're looking for is, our obligation, our oath is to apply the rule of law. Don't inject anything political into it. Don't inject anything personal into it. Are we applying the law? And you can tell, we're a hot court. So you can tell by the questions that we're asking, are we taking the law and trying to apply it to the facts of the case? So you can look at that when you are watching us ask questions and interacting with the attorneys. And you can look at that on our live stream and after even the argument is over. So if you work during the day and you can't watch it until that evening, or you want to watch it 2 months later, you can watch any, a high profile case, or you can look at cases you're interested in. And then of course, all of our opinions are online. You can look at our website. It's www.kscourts.org. And you can go and look at the opinions. And I know that is, hard to do, if you're a non-lawyer, especially to read the opinions. But you can, read, there are head notes at the beginning or a syllabus paragraphs at the beginning, so you can get the gist of it. And again, what you're looking for is this, is this a political opinion, or is it an opinion where you're applying the rule of law, to the facts? And so you'll see that there are statutes, and we're applying those statutes or the Constitution to the facts of a certain case. And then the other thing is, in Johnson County, pretty lucky because the Johnson County Bar, which is the group of 1,300 attorneys that practice in Johnson County, they use their dues to pay for judicial evaluations of all the judges in Johnson County and all the judges on the Court of Appeals and all the justices on the Supreme Court. So you can go to their website, which I do not have memorized, jocobar.org probably? Gov. No, it must be org. Just put in Johnson County, Kansas Bar Association. Johnson County, Kansas Bar Association, and you should come, and it's on their main page. And there's a video. There'll be a video, and you can see all the evaluation results. And they ask all the attorneys and fellow judges, and it's all anonymous. So even if you're a judge and you're evaluating another judge, like I filled out an evaluation because, you know, I live in Johnson County, so you can go there. So that's a good resource. And, you know, it would be good if every bar association across the state of Kansas could do that, but it costs money. And so that's kind of a bummer there. But you could also, in Johnson County, you know, everything is public. You can go and go to the courthouse and look. The records are open. There's the Kansas Open Records Act. You can go and look at records. And in fact, we've adopted a new case management system where records are going to be even more accessible, where you don't have to walk into the courthouse. So I hope that answers your question.
It does very well, thank you.
You know, you need to probably keep in mind too that there's going to be a lot that you are not going to be able to find. I mean, what is the value of the fact that you know, you don't read about me in the paper doing something inappropriate, you know, or you're not there to see the hours and hours and hours that I'm reading cases and studying cases and trying to figure out some of those difficult legal issues to interpret the law, or the hours spent in writing one of those opinions that you read. I can appreciate the difficulty of doing that, but that's, you know, you're not ever going to be there when my husband tells me, you have got to stop for the day, and you need to have some dinner. But that's okay. If you look on, as Justice Standish says, to read the opinions, you can read the final results. You can look at the Johnson County evaluation and think about those things. But also, just remember, there's a lot of things that happen that, you know, when we're working to try to remain appropriate, that you're not going to see.
I would just add one thing, and that is, if you do look at that Johnson County evaluation, the things they ask the attorneys to rate, I think are a good checklist of things to look for the qualities or attributes that you would want in a judge that you were going to retain. So it's worth looking at, if for no other reason, just to walk yourself through, this is what a judge should be evaluated on, whether it be by an attorney or by a lawyer.
So yes, that's quickly our last question is, why is it a problem to vote for judges based on political views?
Well, how do you know that? How do you know my political view? Nancy Anstead, sitting in the back of the room, she's been one of my closest friends for decades. I would challenge you, I would guess that she might have trouble telling you what my political view is on many, many, many topics. Because even with a very close friend, I'm not going to reveal my position on something that might come before me. Because if I do that, I find myself in a position then of, I've staked my claim. If any of you have ever served on a jury, you probably remember the trial judge saying to you, keep an open mind until you have heard all of the evidence and the arguments of the attorneys. And part of that is because social scientists tell us that if you start to say, I'm leaning this way, or I really think it's going to be this way, then a lot of times what you end up doing is spending your energy thinking how to continue to build the case that goes that way. You start to look for the things that lend credence to that viewpoint, and you ignore the things that counter it. You have become biased. And my job is to not have that bias. And so frankly, I don't read a lot of the news articles. Because I don't want to pick up the pros and the cons and the biases and the opinions that are being stated there, because if that matter comes before me, I want to approach it without me even having necessarily any idea of where I would come out on the issue. And I certainly don't want other people to know what my political belief is. And so I just challenge voters to say how you could read anything I write and say that is my political opinion. It is not. It is the opinion that I felt I had to reach by following the law. I may disagree with that law. I may vehemently disagree with that law, but I am going to follow that law because that's my oath and that's my job.
We've worked our entire professional lives to be able to set those things aside and decide based only on the facts and the law. That's it. It's what we do. That's our job.
Thank you all. That is all the time we have today. I would like to thank all three of you justices for coming and sitting with us, and everyone in the room and online watching. I'm going to invite Michael with Mainstream Coalition to the stage for some more information about the November 8th election.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Very good. And mumble a little bit. I want to thank our wonderful moderators this evening, Ephraim, Margaret. Thank you so much for a wonderful job. And of course, our justices here with us this evening. Thank you for being here. I think something that really resonated with me, and you've each touched on it. You're not here to please us. You're here to interpret the law. So thank you for interpreting the law. Appreciate that. What else? Yes. Go to the ballot box when we fill out our ballots this year, because there's a lot of information. The ballot's a little heavy this year, right? Well, I also want to thank Jenny Pierce with Keep Kansas Courts Impartial for helping to coordinate tonight's event, and our co-hosts, of course, League of Women Voters of Johnson County, League of Women Voters of Lawrence Douglas County, League of Women Voters of Wichita Metro, Loud Light, and Mainstream Coalition are sponsored this evening. Johnson County Community College's Political Engagement and Leadership Alliance student organization. I want to give a big round of applause for the people that put this together, that did the work around this. We have Laurel Birchfield with Mainstream Coalition, Connie Taylor, Marie Hernandez, and Debbie Kitchen with League of Women Voters of Johnson County. And of course, we have Anita Austin with Loud Light. Thank you very much. And I'd also like to thank the justices for letting us flip the script on this evening and ask you questions. Thank you. Let's see, so November 8th, I've already said this, it's a big election, and it's coming up in less than a month, right? And there's a lot of stuff on our ballots. We've got federal candidates, state candidates. In some areas, we have local candidates running, plus 2 really confusing amendments. So yeah, there's 2 more proposed constitutional amendments on the ballot. And of course, justice retention. On my ballot alone, there are 20 justices and judges that I'm going to be asked to retain or not retain. How do I know there's 20? What kind of black magic is this? Nothing. There's some amazing resources out there. I found this out by looking at ksballot.org and vote411.org. You can look up your ballot, you can see who and what is on it, and you can do the research. Because as we've heard tonight, it's incumbent upon us, the voters, to research our candidates, research the issues. And that's why we're here this evening. That's why these organizations have come together. Because we want to be able to provide you with the tools and the resources and the information to cast an informed ballot on November 8th. We also hope, in that vein, we also hope you're going to join us for our 2 upcoming forums. Those will be focused on the 2 constitutional amendments that I just talked about. They'll be on October 27th, thank you, There's so much going on. On October 27th at KU, and then on November 3rd at WSU. Those will be in person and online as well. Couple of dates for you. There's an election on November 8th. Last day to register to vote. Get out your pens, put it in your phone. October 18th. Mail ballots go out on October 19th. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here this evening. Taking time out of your evening to learn more about justice detention and justices in general, and for being here to educate us. Thank you very much.